Welcome back, everyone. I feel like a television show that was on hiatus for the summer vacation, but I am back with 3 essay review topics for you, and I began with the one on territorial expansion. Of the 3, this is the most difficult one for you to organize, so I don't really have an outline. I just did it in chronological order, and then you can decide how you would like to approach the structure of the essay. But the question is, the issue of territorial expansion sparked considerable debate in the period 1800 to 1855. Analyze this debate and evaluate the influence of both supporters and opponents of territorial expansion in shaping federal government policy. So remember, during this time period, this is pre-Civil War, the antebellum period, and the issue is often going to revolve around the expansion of slavery and how that would impact the makeup of the nation. So the first purchase we have is Louisiana Purchase in 1803, and this was done under the presidency of Thomas Jefferson, who, when he was Secretary of State under Washington, was a strict interpreter of the Constitution. If you recall, he was against the creation of the National Bank because he did not believe that the Constitution specifically gave that authority to the government. Hamilton, however, was a loose interpreter of the Constitution. And at this point, I'm not sure if anybody is listening to me. You're probably all reading this cartoon on the bottom. But that's what the beauty of Rewind is. So in 1803, Napoleon, in need of money, offered us this entire area of French territory in exchange for $15 million. Originally, Jefferson simply wanted New Orleans for $10 million. So he changed his views. Some people today would probably refer to him as a flip-flopper. Others might say that he was just evolving. And the impact of Louisiana Purchase is going to be very significant because the nation is going to decide what these new territories' status will be when they decide to try to be admitted as new states to the country. All right, then we go to the War of 1812. The issue for expansion here is that the war hawks okay, that looks like I'm a little rusty here. Let's try this. The war hawks in Congress, men like Henry Clay and John C. Calhoun, were in favor of going to war because they hoped to acquire Canada. And even though that was one of the causes, the desire for expansion, the end of the war with the Treaty of Ghent did not help us receive any new territory. As a matter of fact, the war left us in the same position as we were before, just a status quo situation. Okay, so then we go to 1819, and Congress is going to sign the Adams-Onis Treaty. Adams for Secretary of State John Quincy Adams, and Onis for the Spanish minister, Luis Onis. And we will purchase Florida from Spain, which was one of the earliest permanent European settlements at St. Augustine. Florida was becoming a burden to Spain. So in this treaty, by giving up Florida, the boundaries in the rest of the Spanish territory between what is as Mexico and the rest of the North American continent were clearly defined. So this kind of made it a little bit simpler for Spain to deal with the rest of its territories. All right, now this is a blank slide because I forgot to put a picture in, but I do want you to be familiar with the 1820 Missouri Compromise. And I'm sorry that I don't have a picture, but maybe I'll pause this and see if I can get one. No luck with that, so we'll have to do without. But in 1819, the residents of Missouri were applying for statehood, and Missouri was part of the Louisiana Territory. And if they had come in as a slave state, that would upset the balance between slave and free states in the country. At first, a representative from New York by the name of James Talmadge, he proposed that all slaves in Missouri, which would be coming in as a slave state, would be freed at the age of 25, and then no new slaves could come into the state. But this amendment was clearly rejected by Congress. So this Missouri Compromise is the work of Henry Clay, and there are three parts to it. The first part is that Missouri will enter as a slave state. But to keep everything balanced, we will take a territory off of Massachusetts, call it Maine, and this will become a free state. And then, for the rest of the Louisiana Territory, he decided that at the 36 degrees, 30 minutes line of latitude, we would divide the rest of the territory. So above this territory, that area would be free, and below this would be slave. And this is in 1820. So keep this in mind, because some of you are getting this confused with a compromise 30 years later that I will go over momentarily. Okay, now the next issue is going to be Texas. And after the Mexican War for Independence, Mexican Revolution, when Mexico declares independence and wins that from Spain, there is an area called Texas that did not have many people living there. So to encourage inhabitants into the area, the Mexican government is going to encourage Americans with land. If certain people brought in, I forget the number of individuals, they were giving them free land. One man that took them up on this offer was Stephen F. Austin, who they called him an impresario, a land agent. Now, so many Americans moved into the area that they outnumbered the Mexicans living there 4 or 5 to 1. So at that point, the Mexican government needs to close the border and says no more immigration, no more Americans coming into Texas. And I think if your parents are listening to this with you, they're probably laughing at the irony that went over people's heads in class. So it's too late. The Americans who brought in with them slaves and guns and alcohol are now ready for their own war for independence. So these Texans, who are Americans in the area, are led by Sam Houston. And the 1835-1836 Texas War for Independence will have as the key event the Alamo, when the Texans were beat soundly at a religious site near San Antonio. But 1 year later, they will win the Battle of San Jacinto, and Sam Houston is victorious over Santa Anna, and this will lead to Texas being called the Lone Star Republic, with Sam Houston as the first president of Texas. For 10 years, Texas will be independent, because in Congress they are stuck with the gag rule that prohibits the discussion of slavery to be brought up. And since Texas would have come in as a slave state, that is why it takes 10 years before Texas can be annexed. Now we get to the most important part of the essay, and that is James K. Polk, the most underrated president, arguably, in our nation's past. Now, this whole concept of expansion will be brought together with the term manifest destiny. And it is John L. O'Sullivan who in 1845 used the expression manifest destiny to describe the belief that God wanted America to expand from the Atlantic to the Pacific Ocean. Now, in the election of 1844, James K. Polk defeated Henry Clay on this platform. So his agenda was as follows. Number one, he wanted to annex Texas. And this will be done after his election, but before his inauguration, which is during the lame duck period of a presidency. So, number one, Texas is done. Then we go to, actually in the next slide, Oregon. And for Oregon, we had a dispute with Great Britain. So this Oregon territory was claimed both by the United States and Britain. At this point, Spain and Russia had dropped out. And the slogan that we used was 5440 or fight, meaning we want everything below the 5440 parallel or else we're going to war. Now, Polk probably didn't intend to go to war with Britain because he had his eyes on another area. So the threat of going to war convinced the British to withdraw and to settle this at the 49th parallel, which I didn't mean to move there. So what you know of as the top of our country today at the 49th parallel was just extended all the way to the Pacific Ocean. So Oregon is check. Then the last area will be California. His goal was to acquire this area. However, the Mexicans controlled it. So he did make an offer to the Mexicans, to the Mexican government, for California, but their legislature rejected that. Now, the problem we have is that there's a dispute over the border between Texas and Mexico. The United States believed that the border was the Rio Grande, whereas Mexico believed that the border was the Nueces River. So we sent soldiers to this area, and they were shot at and killed by the Mexican troops. So now this convinced Polk that he had the authority to declare war since they provoked the conflict. But there was a young congressman from Illinois by the name of Abraham Lincoln who disputed that, or I should say challenged it. And he called for the exact spot that blood was shed. So he referred to this as his spot resolutions. The spot resolutions were not convincing enough for the rest of the Congress because war was declared. Now, the Mexican-American War will be a victory for the United States, and we will sign the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, also known as the greatest treaty ever. In the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, the U.S. will receive the Mexican cession. This is a very significant area of land that I also did not have a picture for. Actually, it's probably back here. Well, anyway, it's going to be California, New Mexico, Arizona, Utah, part of Colorado. Now, the debate is what should we do with all of this land? At first, there was a man, David Wilmot, from Pennsylvania, congressman, and his Wilmot Proviso, and I see now people are realizing, oh, now I understand why it's called that, was that this should all be part of the Free Soil Platform, meaning no slavery. The Free Soil movement was committed to stopping the expansion of slavery. They are not abolitionists. They were allowing it to stay where it already existed. Some would even consider them racist in that they were trying to prevent black people from moving into the new territory. But the Wilmot Proviso was rejected. So then we get to the Compromise of 1850. And in the Compromise of 1850, Henry Clay, along with Stephen Douglas, will arrange for a 5-part compromise. The first part, California enters as a free state. The second part is the rest of the Mexican cession will use the concept of popular sovereignty. And popular sovereignty is letting the people decide. And this was an idea from a Michigan Congressman, Lewis Cass. The third part of the Compromise of 1850 is a stricter fugitive slave law. All right, a little awkward silence there, sorry. And the fourth part of the compromise would be the banning of the slave trade in D.C. Not slavery, just the importation or the sale, I should say, the sale of slaves as auction sites. And then the fifth part is $10 million to Texas for a strip of land. This compromise was passed one part at a time, and some people do not think that the measures would have been approved under President Zachary Taylor, but he died from eating bad cherries and sour milk, so that led to Millard Fillmore being president. And then just to conclude territorial expansion, in 1853, the United States purchased this little area of land between Arizona and New Mexico called the Gadsden Purchase in order to build a transcontinental railroad through the South. And that concludes American expansion. Tried to keep it at 15 minutes, but I went to 16. Hopefully that helps everybody. I did not include the 1842 Lumberjack War. I should say 1838 Lumberjack War. That was settled by the 1842 Webster-Ashburton Treaty, but now I just sound like a nerd in Jimmy Fallon's audience. It was good seeing you, hearing from you guys again, and on to video number 2.